Good morning and welcome to Sunday morning at the Marxist Forum. We have been meeting every Sunday morning for over a decade and a half. And now that we're on Zoom, I should say good afternoon and good evening for those of you in other time zones. These weekly programs are organized by the Institute for the Critical Study of Society, the ICSS, we go by that acronym. This session has been recorded and it will be posted on YouTube shortly, usually tomorrow morning. It will be on YouTube, and we recommend going to our website. And our website is ICSSmarks.org. And on our website, you can find past programs, the YouTubes from past programs, write-ups on the past programs, and also what the future programs are. And also on our website, there's a donate button, and we highly appreciate any donations because we do have some operating expenses for this operation. My name is Roger Harris. I'm on the program committee, and this program has been a platform for diverse opinions. You can, and then once again, if you'd like to sign up for notifications of our programs, go to our website. And again, the website is ICSSmarks.org. Now, for those of you who've been following the news, you can't help but know what's happening or hearing what's happening in the Southern Caribbean, the Eastern Pacific. There's been nearly over 80 people killed. There are extrajudicial murders by our government, by the U.S. government, that is, for supposed drug interdiction. They have not seized yet a single ounce of drugs. During this same period, the Venezuelan government has seized 46 tons of drugs and didn't kill one person. Right now, the United States is having an offensive against Venezuela. It's been a quarter-century offensive. It's spreading to other countries such as Colombia. And our speaker today will be discussing that. Our speaker today, and I'm very, very happy to have him join us, is Dan Kovalik. He is the in-house counsel. He was the in-house counsel for the United Steelworkers for 26 years at their headquarters in Pittsburgh. He also served as counsel for Colombian plaintiffs against U.S. corporations related to various human rights and labor violations. He previously taught international human rights law at the University of Pittsburgh School of Law for 12 years. And Dan has twice addressed the United Nations Security Council. He's written extensively. He's the author of 10 books, most recently, Syria, the Anatomy of Regime Change. And Dan, I will add, Dan, if you don't mind, I'll deviate from the script one iota to say that another thing that we don't often see in Dan's written up bios, but Dan is probably the best liked person in the entire left movement. So it's just a honor and a pleasure to introduce Dan. Dan, I understand that you have just come back from Colombia. So tell us about that.
Yes. Well, first of all, Roger, thanks for that very kind introduction. I really appreciate it. And I should say that I am broadcasting from Roger's house here in the Bay Area in Marin County. So, so I was in Colombia about 2 weeks ago, and I went there for two reasons. One, to meet with President Gustavo Petro about his being placed on the OFAC list, the Office of Foreign Asset Control list, which is essentially a U.S. blacklist of people. It's a joint project of the State Department and the Treasury. And those who find themselves on the list, their economic life becomes difficult to impossible. They cannot access funds in banks. They can't use banks. They can't deal with any businesses in the United States. They can't travel to the United States. They can't even travel over U.S. airspace, which, if you're in Colombia, becomes very difficult. So I went to meet with him about trying to get him off the list, him and his wife and his son, and the interior minister, all of whom were put on the list maybe a month ago. And the designation followed, as a labor lawyer, when you deal with employment law cases and possible discrimination and whatnot, they always say timing it can be evidence in and of itself for ill intent. And in this case, the OFAC designations shortly followed Gustavo Petro's appearance in New York City, where he gave a speech at the United Nations condemning the genocide in Gaza and saying that a military intervention was necessary to halt that genocide. He also appeared on the streets of New York at a protest, called upon U.S. troops to reject unlawful and immoral orders like blowing up these boats in the Caribbean and now the Pacific. That particular statement by Petro really upset Donald Trump. And in fact, Trump immediately withdrew Petro's visa at that point. The other thing that happened is really just a few days before Petro was put on the OFAC list, he announced he was pulling Colombia out of its partnership with NATO. Many people might be surprised to hear that Colombia, a Caribbean and Pacific nation, was a partner to the North Atlantic Treaty Organization. That was a decision made by Petro's predecessor, Ivan Duque. So it's very clear that the OFAC designation was motivated by these statements and acts by Petro, which Trump and others in the U.S. government found objectionable. And I'll get back to Petro in a moment, because really the history of Gustavo Petro is a very good microcosm for the history of Colombia and really Gran Colombia. And I think it's important to think about Gran Colombia when we're talking about these issues. Gran Colombia existed from 1819 to 1831 and included the states of Colombia, Venezuela, Ecuador, Panama, parts of Brazil, and also Guyana. And you'll recall that Hugo Chavez often talked about wanting to restore Gran Colombia. And in fact, that's, why Chavez led the change to the Constitution, which renamed Venezuela the Bolivarian Republic of Venezuela. And so it's important to think of all these countries together, and certainly the U.S. does, and is really focused right now on threatening both Colombia and Venezuela. And again, I'll get back to that in a moment. But the other reason I was in Colombia was to meet with a family of a fisherman who was killed in these bombings. He went out to fish. He radioed his family that it was a good day for fishing, and he never came home. And he was blown up in one of these attacks by the United States, leaving a wife, her children, and another adult child. And this is really, what this war is about. It's about murdering poor people, again, in the Caribbean and the Pacific, people who either are not dealing in drugs at all or who might, in order to make a little extra money, might traffic in petty amounts of drugs, and they're the ones being killed without due process, without trial. I mean, it's just completely reprehensible. And so I'm going to represent that family and trying to get compensation for them for this murder. But back to Petro and the history of the region and Colombia in particular. Colombia, I actually probably know more about Colombia than any other country in the world, maybe besides Nicaragua, which I'm also have studied a lot. But Colombia, I've been going to since 1999 and have been there many times and really have seen much of the country. In fact, in very remote areas that very few Colombians have traveled to. And in the course of my work there and in the course of my travels, I got to know Gustavo Petro. I've known him since he was a senator. And again, it's important to think about Petro and what he's accomplished and what he represents. He was a guerrilla leader of the M19 guerrillas, which were fighting against state repression in Colombia. He served time in jail and then was released as part of a peace and amnesty deal. He ran for the Senate. He became a senator. He served a few terms as senator and then became mayor of Bogota and then president of the republic. So it's a pretty amazing career in life that he has led. When he was senator, when I met him, what he was doing, famously doing, he was the lone voice in the Colombian Congress speaking out against what was then known as the para-political scandal, which was a scandal involving the close ties between many politicians, including the top politician at that time, President Alvaro Uribe, and the paramilitary death squads. Petro, at great risk to himself, spoke out about this. And when I was at the Steelworkers, when Petro was under a particular threat in Colombia, I asked the Steelworkers to invite him to Washington to meet with Senate staff, talk about the parapolitical scandal, because at that time the U.S. was giving an inordinate amount of money to the Colombian military, $10 billion over a 10-year period. And again, very much like now, the money was ostensibly to fight drugs, but really it was given to suppress the social movements in Colombia. And that really needs to be pointed out. And by the way, after the 10 years and $10 billion to the Colombian military, the White House had to admit, and it did, there was not any diminution in coca production or drug trafficking from Colombia. So if the goal was fighting drugs, it was a complete failure. But I believe, in fact, it was not about fighting drugs. And I'll give you an example of how that's the case. When Plan Colombia was being debated in Congress, and by the way, that was what the U.S. called it, Plan Colombia, but in Colombia they called it Plan Washington because they knew who was pulling the strings. This was a Clinton plan to give this $10 billion in military aid ostensibly to fight drugs. But very interestingly, I attended a congressional hearing to debate Plan Colombia, and the hearing was entitled "Drugs and Social Policy in Colombia." So shockingly, I expected when I went there to hear about drugs and social policy in Colombia. Instead, I got to hear the vice president of Occidental Petroleum talk about the need to send money to Colombia to protect its pipelines. Okay? That is more accurate as to what Plan Colombia was about, what the aggression against Venezuela is about. and that is making those countries safe for maximum exploitation of their resources, especially oil, but not only, and of their labor, right? And I think the fact that Occidental was speaking, it was even invited to speak about drugs and social policy and had nothing to say about either, was quite revealing of this. It should be said within those 10 years, this was the height of the worst violence in Colombia since La Violencia in the early 50s, which claimed hundreds of thousands of Colombians after the murder of a very popular presidential candidate named Gaitan. It has not been confirmed who killed him, but there's very good evidence that the CIA had backed that. But in any case, what resulted was a civil war, essentially, that claimed hundreds of thousands of lives. Well, this, in the period the U.S. was giving $10 billion, you had hundreds of thousands of people killed as well. And again, not drug lords. These were poor people. These were union leaders. That's why I got involved with the steel workers. Between about the year, between 1986 and like 2000 and I want to say 8 or 9, 4,000 trade union leaders were killed in Colombia. 4,000. Think about that. It was unprecedented. Colombia was the most dangerous country in the world year after year after year for trade unionists, by far. Right? The next country had a few people who were killed. At that time, over 200 union leaders were being killed every year. And this was under Plan Colombia. Indigenous leaders were killed. Catholic priests who preached liberation theology were killed. Between 1984 and I believe 2014, according to the Catholic Bishop's office in Bogota, 80 Catholic priests were killed and 2 bishops. Did you ever hear about that? I doubt it. This did not make the news. And so Petro was up against that, against this military and political alliance with the death squads. And the death squads still exist. And by the way, the death squads were a creature of the United States. We often hear about death squads, and when we hear about death squads, many of us may think of El Salvador. Is maybe the most famous place for U.S.-backed death squads. And in fact, remember in the Second Gulf War in Iraq, at one point, the U.S. talked about using the Salvador option there, which meant using death squads. But in fact, it really could be called fairly the Colombia option, because Colombia had death squads before El Salvador. And before Vietnam, the U.S. used death squads there too. So in 1962, and I hope the history is helpful to you, but I think it's important to know this history. In 1962, John F. Kennedy, in response to Vatican II and the growth of liberation theology, created the national security doctrine, which of course had nothing to do with national security. It was a plan to destroy, again, social movements, particularly in Latin America, and to destroy the movement of liberation theology. And the first laboratory for this was Colombia. A U.S. General, William Yarborough, was sent to Colombia in 1962, and he set forth the details of the national security doctrine as it would play out there. And one thing he was very open about was the need to create death squads. He didn't call them that. He called them quasi-military groups that could carry out assassinations of union leaders, priests, etc., and give some plausible deniability to the Colombian military and the U.S. that was backing that military. So this was really the origins of the death squads, again, that the U.S. has used throughout the world. And again, Petro has spent a career fighting against them, first as a guerrilla and then as a politician. And the fact he became president at all, and the fact that he's survived his presidency till now, is nothing short of a miracle. And I think he as a leader has to be put in that perspective. But make no bones about it, the U.S. would like to bring Colombia back to the dark days. It would like to bring Colombia back as its beachhead in the region. The U.S. still does have 7 military bases there that Petro, I think, really had no power to get rid of. I think he would have been killed for sure if he tried to do that. So those are still there, but he's not. He made it very clear, and again, very shortly before the OFAC designation, that he would not allow Colombia to be used as a staging ground for an attack on Venezuela. And that is his crime, or one of his crimes, as far as the U.S. is concerned. Recall another political figure who made a similar vow back in 1989, a guy named Manuel Noriega, the president of Panama. His sin, while they said it was because he ran drugs, which was true in that case. Noriega did run drugs because, of course, he was running them for the CIA. So that wasn't a problem. The problem was that he announced he would stop allowing Panama to be used as a staging ground for the Contras in Nicaragua. And that's when George Bush invaded, killed anywhere from 400 to 4,000 working class people in Panama City. The exact numbers aren't known. Many of the people were just incinerated like these fishermen in the ocean. And they arrested Noriega and brought him to the U.S. and put him in jail. But again, his sin was refusing to support U.S. regime change operations in Nicaragua. And that's Petro's sin as well. We need to keep that in mind when we think about this. And by the way, Panama is very relevant too. Gustavo Petro said something when I was with him in Capitol Hill when we had him visiting the senators. He said something very profound. He said that the violence in Colombia that we see even to this day, with various armed groups roaming the land and fighting each other and whatnot. He actually believes that that process of these types of groups existing and spreading violence throughout Colombia began in 1903 when the United States backed rebels to break Panama off from Colombia, right? Panama was part of Colombia in order for the U.S. to be able to build and control the Panama Canal. And Petro believes the roots of the violence Colombia has suffered can be traced back to that event, which is very profound, really. And so you see at various moments, I mentioned the Panama Canal, violence, the murder of Gaitan, which I think the U.S. was involved in, the creation of the paramilitaries. Time and time again, the U.S. has intervened in a way that has brought horrible violence to this country. I would say there's maybe no country in the world that suffered more from U.S. intervention than Colombia. And now the U.S. is threatening again to attack, the countries of Gran Colombia. And by the way, when we, let's talk a little more about drugs, because again, it's a giant pretext for U.S. intervention. But let's recall, that when they, attacked Panama and arrested Noriega for allegedly being a drug pen, at the very time they were doing this, the CIA was running cocaine for the Contras. Remember that? The CIA also ran drugs for the Kuomintang, for South Vietnam, and in Colombia itself. And actually, there's a very good show, very entertaining and pretty accurate, and called Narcos. If you ever saw it, it was on Netflix. It deals with this fact that the U.S., which fought the Medellin cartel of Pablo Escobar, they used the Cali cartel. They supported the Cali cartel to defeat the Medellin cartel. So it wasn't about eradicating drugs in Colombia. It was about guaranteeing that their friends got the drug trade and proceeds. In this case, the Cali cartels were run by two brothers, Carlos and Fidel Castaño, uh, who would go on to create the AUC paramilitary death squads. And they were trained, these death squads in particular were trained by Israel. In fact, Carlos Castaño would write in his memoir that he owed his life and his country to Israel. And again, without the U.S. intervention to back those cartels, that would not have happened. You would not have had the growth, this really massive growth of the death squads in Colombia at that time. And when I say at that time, that was in the late 90s, early 2000s. And again, they still haunt the countryside of Colombia. So the idea that the U.S. is fighting drugs is a joke. I mean, it's a joke. It would be funny if there weren't real terrible consequences to it. Similarly, of course, in Venezuela, we know the issue isn't drugs; it's oil. And at various times, various Trump officials, including Trump himself, have been very open about that. That they want Venezuela's oil, and they want Colombia's oil, and they want other rich minerals and other resources there, and they are willing to apparently go to war to get it in a way that we really, aside from some, kind of just one-off campaigns, again, like the Panama invasion in 1989, the Grenada invasion in 1983, the invasion of the Dominican Republic in 1965. These were very short-lived interventions. You really didn't see those interventions after World War II. Most of the interventions were covert. So really what we're seeing today, especially with the Navy being sent to the Caribbean to threaten Venezuela, it really is old-timey gunboat diplomacy, right? That we saw really at the end of the 19th century and early 20th century. This is Teddy Roosevelt type of, and William Howard Taft type of stuff. So it's much more brazen, I think, than we saw in the latter part of the 20th century. And it shows, I think, again, a return really to a much more aggressive U.S. foreign policy, one that we really need to resist. Anyway, I probably spoke too long, but I hope that at least gives you some food for thought.
Not too long, but looking forward to the Q&A now, where we can go into this with a lot more detail. For those of you who are new to the Marxist Forum, we have a robust Q&A procedure. Each person gets 2 minutes to either make a statement or ask a question or do both, but only 2 minutes. Our guest and host will have as much time as they want to respond. And to ask a question, go to the bottom of your screen and raise your hand. You can have your hand colored in the color of your choice. And I'll start answering, calling people as I see their hands. I will also just take a moment now to make an announcement about future programs for the the upcoming holiday. Some people call it Indigenous Rights Day. Some people call it Thanksgiving. We will be taking a hiatus. We'll be coming back on December 7th. Right now, we do not have a confirmed speaker for that day, but the following weekend, we're very happy to have Mary Gao, who will come back. She is a regular at these programs, and Mary will be talking about rocking the boat. Flashbacks to the 1970s Asian movement. So please join us next week, and not next week, but in 2 weeks, and then the following weeks we'll be continuing our regular programming. So I'm looking at the hands right now, and I see Kit back. So Kit, it's all yours. Please unmute yourself, and the stage is all yours.
Okay, thank you, Roger. I didn't think I'd get picked so soon. Thank you, Dan, for speaking today on such a timely topic. I just have a quick question in terms of the sentiments of the how people in the U.S. feel about this. Is there a chance of stopping this war from going through, or from, for being, can we stop it and make it end quickly? Thank you. That's all I have to ask. Thank you.
Sure. Well, in general, the polls on these sorts of things in the U.S. tend to be very good. I mean, the polls show that a majority of Americans oppose an attack on Venezuela. They certainly oppose these boat bombings. Now, can we translate that into changing, averting a war? Sure, the answer is yes, it's possible. I think we need a mass peace movement to do that. I think that all of us have been calling for a long time. I don't necessarily see that, emerging, in the immediate future. But we have to do what we can. We need to raise our voices against it, and we need to educate people about it. So there is a majority of people who oppose the policy there, but I think it's not a huge majority. So I think it's important to try to change the mind of fellow Americans and also our Congress people and make it clear we don't want this intervention. There was this study by the Rand Corporation in 1994. It showed, and it studied cocaine in particular, and it said that it's 20 times more effective to treat drug addiction at home, than it is to try to destroy drugs at the source or to interdict drugs. If the U.S. really cared about drugs and drug use, they would be putting a lot of money into social programs to, again, treat addiction, to treat depression, to eliminate poverty. Of course, the U.S. is doing exactly the opposite. They, as we are speaking, cutting all those programs. And, as Marxists, obviously, we see things in a global way, an interconnected way. And, we have to call for, money to be spent on social programs and not on war, including wars on drugs. That's my thoughts on that.
Okay, well, thank you. I'm calling people now in order of the, I see them on my screen. So Ann Lewis, you're up next, and followed by Peter Fay.
Hi, thanks so much. And I was wondering, and this is really because I'm also a union person, and I was just wondering how you talk to the steelworkers, in particular to the rank and file, during this history of involvement in Colombia and Venezuela and so forth. Were you able to bring the union as a whole closer to a peace stand or not? And how did you do it if you were?
Yes, I was. I was not on Venezuela. I was unsuccessful on that score. But on Colombia, I got the U.S. to take an openly anti-military stance, opposing U.S. military support for Colombia and opposing the free trade agreement with Colombia that was being negotiated at the time, in order to um, send a message that they opposed these union killings. And actually, for about, I don't know, 8 years of my career there, I spent most of my time working on these human rights cases out of Colombia, and the steelworkers allowed me to do that, which I'm very grateful for. And really, I sold the idea to them by saying, look, Colombia is the most dangerous country in the world for trade unionists. This is a matter of urgency for U.S. unions because the U.S. is sponsoring the military that's carrying out these murders. And we have an obligation to stand with those Colombian workers and unionists. And they agreed. I was lucky because at the time, the president of the steelworkers was a guy named Leo Gerard, who recently passed away, who had been a miner from Canada, Sudbury, Canada. His father was a communist. And so he had some real left-wing sympathies. And he was very excited to do the Colombia work, to have me do the Colombia work. And the rank and file loved it. They loved the Colombia work. Because they got it. They got it that we could make a difference in protecting unionists in Colombia because of the leverage we had over our own government and its policies. And I think we did make a difference. And the only reason I say that is because trade unionists in Colombia told us we made a difference and we saved lives. So there you go. So I'm very proud of the work we did back then. And now I'm honestly, I had in some ways in my life moved on a little from Colombia to other countries like Palestine. That's been very prominent in my life right now. I hadn't been doing a lot in Colombia. And then about a month ago, the president, Gustavo Petro, tweeted out that I was his lawyer in the U.S. It was going to fight the OFAC designation. So, as Al Pacino said in The Third Godfather, just when I thought I was out, they pulled me back in again. So I'm back in Colombia.
Okay. Thank you, Dan. And Peter Fay, followed by Lucy Rios.
Hi, nice to see you, Dan.
Me too.
Uh, I'm saying hello as a former executive board member at Local 2285. Probably before your time, I was involved steelworkers, but that's not why I'm what I have to ask about. I was interested in what you said about it's about oil in Venezuela. Which, obviously that's going to play a big role. But is it only about oil? Is it because, sometimes I see these interventions in Latin America based less on economic factors than geostrategic factors, perhaps, other forces basically having some sway over political movements in Latin America. I don't really know. I mean, I haven't investigated this, but I certainly know that other, like for example, Russia and China both have significant relationships with Venezuela. Is it more about, I mean, China has, I think, $60 billion worth of investments in Venezuela. So there is a lot going on that's more than just trying to control, trying to get American, oil companies into Venezuela. There's also the question of, the Monroe Doctrine trying to, determine, the United States wants to determine everything that goes on and not prevent any foreign relations with any other major powers. And is this more of a geostrategic great power conflict between the US and, who knows, China, Iran, somebody? Or is this really just purely about dollars and about, American corporations trying to invest? I'm interested in what your perspective is on that.
Well, I mean, no, I don't see it as a great power thing at all. I mean, the Monroe Doctrine of 1823, yes, was a doctrine in which President Monroe announced that the U.S. had the sole prerogative of influence in the Western Hemisphere, and at that time, that doctrine was aimed at Europe. It's saying to Europe, stay out of Latin America and the Caribbean because that's the U.S. domain. So yes, of course, this is the continuation and the manifestation of the Monroe Doctrine. There's no question about that. But what was the Monroe Doctrine itself about? I mean, in the end, it is about economic control. It is about controlling resources and labor. And part of that also is destroying any type of socialist movements in the world, but in particular in the hemisphere. And so, yeah, I mean, part of this is to destroy the Bolivarian Revolution. There's no question about that. And that's ideological a bit, but again, it goes back to it's because socialism interferes with, the ability to extract maximum profits from a country. It all comes back to that, I think. I don't want to go down too much of a tandem, but I've been reading a book now called The War Against the Commons, and it's about the Enclosure Acts in Great Britain, which, there were a number of them over a period of centuries as capitalism was being created. And it was a process of taking away communal lands, farm lands, grazing lands, from people and dividing them up into private lots and handing them over or selling them to a few rich people who ended up controlling all the land and therefore all the wealth, and I think we're still in the process of the war against the commons in places like Palestine, for example, Syria, Lebanon, against societies that may not be socialistic in a kind of Marxist sense, but in a more kind of traditional sense, and also against countries like Venezuela, which have socialist aspects to it. So I mean, I don't know. However you want to look at it, those are the reasons the U.S. wants to do it. But I do think in the end, I think what Chomsky said about Iraq was right. He said if their main export were cabbage, we probably wouldn't have gone to war with them. And I think that's probably true with Venezuela. So,
Thank you. There's a lot of hands up, and we'll try to get to everybody before the session is over. I'm answering questions as they come up, as I see them on my screen, and it might not be in the exact order that you raise the hands, but there's no way for me to sort of know when you raised your hand other than looking at the order on my screen. So I'll continue doing it in that way. And so the next person up is Richard Wright, followed by Freddie. Oh, no, excuse me, Lucy. I just skipped over you. So no, Lucy Rios,
Okay.
all means.
I just wanted to ask about the people in Colombia. Do you think that Petro has the support of the base strong enough, like in Venezuela? That Maduro appears to to have a lot of base support. There is a lot of feeling of nationalism, strong. Even the people who were on the left that appeared like they don't like Maduro, they're still supporting him. But
Yeah. I think Petro has a lot of support amongst the poor, workers, indigenous peoples, Afro-Colombians. No question about that. But there are certainly powerful, obviously, forces against him too. And Petro has something that he's up against that Maduro's not. Maduro has a very loyal military. After the short-lived coup against Chavez in 2002, Chavez really cleaned house, right? Because parts of the military had backed that coup and were part of the coup. So this was a good occasion for Chavez to really fill the ranks with loyalists. So you have a very loyal army in Venezuela. That is not true in Colombia, right? This is a very traditionally right-wing military, and you have very powerful economic, actors as well that are right-wing, so that are aligned against Petro. I'm honestly amazed that he has survived, literally and figuratively. Because again, I think that he could really be physically eliminated by that. So while I do think he has a big base of support, the chance for a military coup or whatnot is not out of the realm of possibility in Colombia. In Venezuela, it's much more remote, I think. So.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. I see Richard Wright's hand is down, so Freddie comes up next, and then Janet Coburn. So Freddie, it's all yours.
Thank you. Yes. Okay. Thank you. Thank you, Dan. You referenced liberation theology a few times, so my question is regarding that. I think you're a practicing Catholic. I went to Catholic school from kindergarten through high school, and liberation, and I was involved in the Central America Solidarity Movement. You were talking about liberation theology in Colombia, and I think Father Gustavo Gutierrez was one of the main exponents of liberation theology. He's from Colombia. There was Father Camilo Torres, who was a guerrilla, and so my question is whether, in your estimation, it's still sort of a distinct or discrete movement as it was a number of years ago, or if with the growth of like the evangelical movement. And I know the sort of the drop in the number of Catholics in places like Brazil, and I'm assuming Colombia, but maybe that's not the case. And also like, also like Maduro, Hugo Chavez, Daniel Ortega have never shied away from sort of claiming Christianity. But then we see in Nicaragua, like people like, I think he passed away already, but Father Ernesto Cardenal, becoming critical of Sandinismo and of Daniel and Rosario. And so my question is it still a thing? Is it still like a movement, or has it just sort of faded, but the Christian, the significance of Christianity is still in play with these, radical movements?
Yeah, well, it's a good question. I would say that it exists, but it's on life support, and not because it faded away, because it was brutally destroyed. Right? Again, 80 priests in Colombia. You had Archbishop Romero murdered in El Salvador. Many clerics, nuns, bishops throughout the region were murdered. Right, beginning in around 1962 and continuing on. And then, of course, you had the Vatican as well that turned against them in a big way under Pope John Paul II. and and also Pope Paul VI. Um, so you had the Vatican repressing and suppressing liberation theology while the U.S. was sponsoring its physical elimination. So I would say it barely survived that. In Colombia, there's certainly liberation priests. I mean, the most prominent one is Father Javier Geraldo, who I know, and he actually helped me start my work in Colombia. And he has a book he wrote with a very good introduction by Noam Chomsky called "Colombia: The Genocidal Democracy." So you certainly have some liberation theologians left, but the movement's been destroyed largely, And when people like Father Javier Geraldo or Miguel Descoto in Nicaragua, who always stayed loyal to Danielle, Father Descoto, who was a Maryknoll, also one of the founders of liberation theology. When those people pass on, I think that at least the movement we call liberation theology will be gone. But as you say, I do think, the church itself, beginning with Pope Francis, is moving more in that direction anyway, and will become more of a force, I think. But anyway, that's my
Good.
response to that.
Hi, Janet. Unmute yourself, please.
Okay, thank you. Hi, Dan. Thank
Hi.
you. Thank you for your presentation and for all your great work. I have
Thank you.
I have a technical question I hope you can respond to
All
regarding
right.
the Uniting for Peace mechanism
Yes.
that President Petro proposed to use regarding Gaza and how it relates to UN Security Council Resolution 2803 that has just been adopted. The Uniting for Peace Resolution 377V was adopted by the United Nations General Assembly in 1950. It says, quote, that if the Security Council, because of lack of unanimity of the permanent members, fails to exercise its primary responsibility for the maintenance of international peace and security, in any case where there appears to be a threat to the peace, breach of the peace, or act of aggression, end quote, then a Uniting for Peace process can be invoked. However, the resolution does not define what unanimity means when it comes to the lack of unanimity of the permanent members. Now, in general, decisions of the United Nations Security Council are made by an affirmative vote of 9 members, including the concurring votes of the permanent members, P5. However, if one or more of the P5 do not fully agree with a proposed resolution, they can abstain. If that happens, then the resolution can still be adopted if it obtains the required number of 9 favorable votes of the remaining members. My question is, would unanimity have to be 5 yes votes? Or would, for example, 3 yes votes and 2 abstentions, like what happened with 2803, be considered unanimity, or even 1 yes vote and 4 abstentions? I'll post the Uniting for Peace resolution text in the chat. And as an aside, would you post your contact information in the chat when you get a chance? Thank
Sure.
you.
Well, here's my answer to it. I think that, first of all, most likely, the fact that the Security Council resolution passed, even with abstentions, would probably be viewed as unanimous enough from the point of view of the UN. But even if it wasn't viewed that way, and Ann Garrison, I see, is on this Zoom, and she and I have talked about this. I think there's now a huge practical barrier that the Security Council resolution poses to the use of Uniting for Peace. And this is why, again, it maybe gets into why they would view it as unanimous. What would the Uniting for Peace resolution call for? Petro talked about calling for an international peace force, an armed force, to end the genocide in Gaza, which I think is required to end it. I think that is the only thing probably will end it. Well, the Security Council has approved a plan that's going to have their own armed peacekeepers in Gaza. I do not see the General Assembly passing a resolution that's going to send their own peacekeepers to fight the Security Council ones. Do you see what I'm saying? I think, regardless of how the unanimous vote is looked at, I think this Security Council resolution may be a checkmate to the ability to use the Uniting for Peace resolution. That's my view, and I'm not so sure that wasn't the point of it. If I were a betting person, I would bet against anyone now attempting a Uniting for Peace resolution for the reason I said. And by the way, let's be honest, if they had wanted to do it, they should have done it already. We're over 2 years into this genocide. They've waited too long. They've waited too long in terms of what's happened to Gaza, and they've waited too long to allow the Security Council to finally act in a way that is so horrible that it's going to ratify the genocide. So I'm very dismayed, and I'm very dismayed about the prospects of the UN doing anything positive for Gaza. The world has really abandoned Gaza outside of really Yemen, I suppose. That's my 2 cents. That's my honest assessment.
Thank you, Dan. Perhaps we can go back to this, but go on to Eugene Rule, followed by Harriet Haywood. Harriet, I think your hand is down. So, Gene, what?
Am I on?
Yes, you are.
Okay, great. Well,
welcome.
Dan, thanks for a great talk. This is really good.
You.
It really clarifies things. And I'll say a few things. First of all, I'm a retired union member, and I still have my union dues deducted from my retirement check. And I just wanted to read this statement from FDR, who said, if I were a worker, the first thing I would do would be to join a union. And so unions are very important here in this country, and really in the forefront of any fight for social justice, I think. But I also want to say, as usual, I'm wearing my Veterans for Peace cap. And as many of you know, Veterans for Peace is an educational humanitarian organization dedicated to the abolishment of war, which means we try to intervene as to the extent we're capable of against our government being involved in the domestic affairs of other countries. And we know, the Americans are kind of running amok around the world in terms of wars all over the world. But the latest resolution says, no war in Venezuela, no troops in our streets, and no genocide in our name, which is happening in Israel. So I just want to see if you have any comments on this and just put that out as a kind of discussion here. Something people can think about. And if they're so inclined, they can always join Veterans for Peace. It's only $40 a year. So.
Well, I have nothing but great things to say about Veterans for Peace and the work you do. A big reason I came to the Bay Area this weekend was to celebrate Jerry Condon receiving a Peace Award. Jerry Condon was one of the co-leaders of a delegation I was on. In 1988, we drove to Nicaragua with humanitarian aid, and it was one of the most life-changing experiences for me. So I certainly call on everyone to support Veterans for Peace, and I think that resolution's great. I think the work Veterans for Peace is doing is just phenomenal. So thank you.
Thank
Right.
you.
Let me segue on that because Dan, you did mention this event which will be happening in San Francisco at 2 o'clock today. I invite all of you to come. It'll be at 2 o'clock again in the Veterans Memorial Building, that beautiful building in central San Francisco. And we will be honoring Jerry Condon, who has spoken a number of times at the Marxist Forum, on the board of the Veterans for Peace and on the Task Force of America's board. He is receiving the 2025 Peace Award. It's a great honor for him to receive it, and we will be celebrating that with him. The program is an indoor rally, No War on Venezuela. Dan Kovalik, our speaker right now, will be at that program and speaking more about particularly Venezuela. Richard Becker, who's on this call right now, will also be speaking on the same subject. And Laura Wells, who's also on this call, will be emceeing this program. So please join us at 2 o'clock in San Francisco for those of you who are in the Bay Area. With that said, Stan Woods, you're up next.
Yeah, hi. Speaking of announcing events, there's events that's happening against the fight back against ICE and the immigration raids that actually ties in with this. We're Peace and Freedom Party and the Green Party are having an event at the Starry Plow Pub. We have events there about every month on December 6th from 2 to 4 on the resistance to the draconian anti-immigration raids, which brings me to Venezuela. Trump not only is reactionary as hell, we can debate whether he's a fascist or not, but he's also very contradictory. It's sort of interesting. On one hand, he says that the Venezuelans are refugees from socialism who come to the US, but yet he's trying to ship them back. And that's sort of weird because, for the most part, Democratic and Republican administrations didn't ship back Cubans who were genuine anti communists. So I wonder what your thoughts about that and how. What are the main motivations for leaving Venezuela? I suspect it's mainly economic refugees. The same reason that most people in neo-colonies sometimes, well, not most, but many think that life would be better for them in the imperialist center, and not because of any really strong ideological or political differences with the government in power. But I wonder what you thought about that. What are the motivations for, and how much of a base for a military attack would there be among Venezuelans who have left Venezuela?
Yeah, well, I agree that the folks that have fled Venezuela have fled economic immiseration, mostly caused by U.S. sanctions, and specifically from U.S. sanctions that Trump himself imposed beginning in 2017, which at one point brought the revenue of Venezuela to zero. I mean, really, it destroyed Venezuela's economy. And so the fact that there's been a migration from Venezuela to Colombia, for one, but also to the U.S., is largely due to those sanctions. So again, well, I mean, what the contradiction I see is if you really cared about immigration, you wouldn't sanction countries into poverty, right? You wouldn't go to war with those countries. You wouldn't support death squads in those countries. The biggest refugee centers for the U.S. are from what is known as the Northern Triangle of Central America, El Salvador, Honduras, and Guatemala, and that's a direct consequence of the Reagan era wars against those countries. So the U.S. has created the migration problem, and now wants to justify more war on a problem it itself caused. That's my view. of the situation, and that's very common. I mean, if you look at Europe, there's a lot of complaints in Europe. Oh my God, all these Muslims are immigrating to Europe. Yeah, because you destroyed the Middle East, because you destroyed Libya, and you destroyed Iraq and Afghanistan and Lebanon and Syria. I mean, these things have causes, right? And war creates more, migration than any other one factor, and we've been at war with Venezuela, um, a low level war for a time, and now threatening to have, a major war against them. And that will create more and more refugees as well if the U.S. invades. So again, to see a logic in this that makes sense, at least from the claims of concern about migration, you would be on a fool's errand, I believe.
Thank you. So Jim, you're up next. So Jim, if you could unmute yourself. Thank you.
Thank you. Back to the UN for a minute. I had read into what I was hearing that this was a preliminary move that needed further ratification or development of the details. And I've been hoping, maybe foolishly, that that's where the pushback would be in terms of what the actual plan's going to look like. My second question is about Venezuela. Since Colombia is being constrained now, as you describe it, are there any other countries that might step up in a big way to help Venezuela, in Latin America, I'm speaking of? And also, is there any possibility that this could be a situation where the Spanish Civil War scenario develops, where many people go in defense of the Bolivarian Revolution?
Well, to answer the last part of your question first, I mean, there are calls for that, for people to fight, for international brigades to Venezuela. I think if the U.S. invades, I think there will be international brigades, mostly from other Latin American countries. Maybe some Americans, some Europeans, not on the level of the Spanish Civil War, because it's a different time. You don't have a strong Communist Party in the United States. You don't have the Soviet Union, so it would look different. But sure, I think you would see certainly some international brigades there. In terms of countries that are going to help Venezuela, I mean, Russia's helping them already, giving them weapons and other support. China is as well. Iran has probably helped Venezuela out more than any other country economically. I mean, they've been very key in helping get Venezuela's oil industry back online and in supplying Venezuela with fuel and building these pristine grocery stores in Venezuela. So, I mean, it's certainly getting help. I mean, the question would be, would a country actually go to war with Venezuela if the U.S. invaded? I'm not sure that would happen. But who knows? Who knows? It all depends on what happens, what it looks like, what this invasion, if it happens, what it looks like. It certainly, I think, will spark a lot of resistance in Latin America because of the many, centuries of foreign intervention there. So,
And on the UN development?
oh yeah, well, anything's possible, but I really see this Security Council resolution as very close to sealing the fate of Gaza. It's really turning over Gaza to Israel and the United States. And I don't see much hope for the UN changing course on that at this point. I mean, whether it bears saying or not, I mean, I'm very disappointed that China and Russia had abstained. I think that those votes will go down in infamy, is my view, because I see little hope for the UN now playing a very good role in Gaza.
Okay. Paulina, you're up next, followed by Daniel and Sharon.
Thank you, Roger, and thank you, Dan. Yeah, the abstentions will go in as much infamy as the abstention of Russia on the Libya no-fly zone.
And China too. They
And
also
China as well.
abstain. Yes.
Yeah. I would like to come back to Colombian internal politics. President Petro, per the Constitution, has only one term. Elections are coming up in Colombia, and one name that has kind of rung out is Ivan Cepeda.
Yes.
Could you talk about Ivan Cepeda and what he may represent, and whether that's a more radical option for Colombia? Would he garner the broader coalition support to actually win electorally? And is he an even bigger danger let's say, to the Washington consensus, given that President Petro, in the opinion of some Venezuelans, is actually just hedging his bets a bit between being okay with the empire and and supporting Venezuela, for instance? Would Ivan Cepeda be a more radical choice? And correct me if I'm mistaken here.
There's no question he would be. I know Ivan, actually. He's a great guy. He's a communist. His father was a communist who was murdered by the state. And no question he would be a more radical figure. He's a very popular figure. The primary election that elected him had, I think, close to 3 million people come out to vote for that, which is extraordinary. Which shows a lot of support for him. So, yes, I would be very excited about him as president. I think the U.S. would be just as unhappy with him as president. Right now, he's ahead in the polls, but that's with all the parties, involved, and there's a lot. People still think that probably the right-wing candidate has a good chance of winning. So, and the election's in May, so that's an eternity when you're talking about election campaigns. A lot can happen, and I think what happens in Venezuela will be very influential on what happens there. So, but I think Ivan Cepeda would be amazing. I mean, historic. So, I think we should be really supporting his candidacy.
Great. Okay, next up is Daniel Borgstrom, followed by Sharon Rose. Daniel, it's all yours.
Hello. Yes, thank you, Dan Cavola, for your presentation. I have two questions, actually. First is, how safe are you from sanctions or whatever Trump can do? The other question is, Mike, I have a take on these boat bombings, and I wonder if you'd comment on that. That actually the boat bombings are Trump and the U.S. government, the empire's way of saying we can do whatever we want to do. That their way of scaring anybody around the world. It's their message to the world to scare people. Maybe they won't blow people up, but to put sanctions on them. They'll or they can just increase their tariffs. and 20,000 other things they can do. So could you comment on what the could you comment on that? Thank you.
Yeah, well, no, I think I agree with you. I think there is a part of this that is really trying to terrorize, as you say, the world, and even, Americans themselves. If you can say, "Oh, I think this guy's a drug dealer," and just blow him up, why couldn't you do that in the streets of San Francisco? Say, "Oh, that guy's a drug dealer," blow his brains out. I mean, this is a horrible precedent that's being set. And yes, it's a message. It is a message that the U.S. can kill without limit of due process, limit of law, morality. And that's what makes it so awful. So I agree with you. I think the ICE detentions are a similar thing, that we have masked bandits running around detaining people. I think it is to put the population into fear. No question about that. Now, what was your first question? I don't remember. You had
Yes, I want to ask, how safe are you from sanctions or whatever?
I don't know the answer to that. I will say that under the OFAC regulations, I am allowed to be a lawyer for someone on the list. I have to register as a foreign agent, and I'm in the process of doing that. So, I mean, what I'm doing is legal, but, we live in a lawless country. So with that said, I don't know. I'm sure there could be blowback, against me, for this and many other things, I suppose. So, you just go forward, you do your best, and you hope for the best. But I don't know.
Thank you, Dan. Thank you for all the stuff that you're doing. Next is Sharon Rose.
Thank you, Dan, for your presentation. And I absolutely share the concern and disappointment about the Security Council resolution, horrible resolution. But you did say the words, "the world has abandoned Gaza." And I want to just counter that by saying the people of the world have not abandoned Gaza. And there is a growing mass solidarity movement that we need to uphold and, of course, help to build. And, it's for those of us who helped build the anti-Vietnam War movement, including Jerry Condon, of course, I think sometimes we forget that from the point of view of the Vietnamese comrades, they thank us repeatedly. They are very grateful, and they say that we played a role in ending that war and the outcome of the war. And we might think, modestly, we might say, well, of course, it took us forever, it took us way too long and all that kind of thing. But the fact is that we did play a role. And the difference now, of course, is that Americans are not coming home in body bags from Gaza, Palestine, or anywhere else at this point. And so it's more difficult to build a peace and solidarity movement. But that doesn't mean we shouldn't do it. It means that we should try harder and to unite all the different forces who are against this war for a common plan, a common strategic view of what we're doing, and a common way of educating more people, or I hate the word ordinary people, and yet I use it, the masses of people who have a stake in not having wars in our name. But
well, look, I share it. I agree totally with what you're saying. I can't add much to what you're saying. You're obviously totally correct. We need a mass peace movement. as I said, and I agree with you that when you say the world, you mean world governments, not the people. And I would even support, international brigades going to Gaza. And actually, Petro's called for that too, outside of the United Nations. So I agree. I mean, if this is going to change, it's going to be because the people make it change. And we have to try. I agree with that, But I think the UN, as far as the UN is concerned, I've pretty much given up on them. I do think they betrayed Gaza in a huge way, But you're right. The people of the world, I think, still largely stand with Palestine, and the struggle continues. It's going to take a different form, But I don't think it's going to be through the UN largely. So.
Thank you. Okay, up next is Judith Osterman, followed by Ann Garrison. So Judith, if you could unmute yourself.
Did you call on me?
I called on Judith Osterman.
Okay,
I did finally. All right. So thank you, Dan. That was tremendously interesting. And I'm also extremely disturbed about the UN resolution, and particularly Russia and China not vetoing it. I wanted to ask you, since you're a lawyer, Craig Mokhiber has said that everything they did there violated the Charter of the United Nations. Is there any way that an outside person could sue them for having violated their charter? That's one thing. The other thing is the anti-Venezuela invasion and the anti-recolonization of Gaza people have to get together, I believe, and form a united front. And one of the things that Russia that they claim, the reason that they only abstained is because they feared that the United States threatened to double down on the Gaza war and bomb the hell out of everybody. So, but I think that was bullshit, because I don't think the American people would have stood for that, and I want to know what your opinion is of that. Okay, thanks.
Yeah. Yeah, on that, I don't know. I can't speculate as to why Russia and China did what they did, except to say that I disagree with it. I do think they should have vetoed it, and I do think it will have huge repercussions. I don't see any avenue for a legal challenge against what the Security Council did. It reminds me of the statement about the U.S. Supreme Court. The Supreme Court, how's it go? The Supreme Court how's it go? It's not, the Supreme Court is not supreme because it's infallible. It's infallible because it's supreme. And what that means is, the Supreme Court doesn't have to be right. There's just no one who can, but they're the last say. And so whatever they say goes. And that's true with the Security Council. I mean, they don't have to be right. They make the rules. They, under the under the UN Charter, the Supreme Court, this Security Council has all the power. So I don't see anything changing that unless a new resolution is put forward and different votes happen, So I don't see a challenge realistically there.
What kind of new resolution?
Well, one that doesn't give over Gaza to Trump. I mean, it would be one that, would call for actually a ceasefire in Gaza. But again, that's never going to happen because the U.S. would veto it. So this is not going to happen. That Security Council resolution will stand. That's my view. Not because I'm happy with it, because it's just reality.
What about the other part of my question? What you think about whether the people of America would go for a renewal of the bombing Gaza?
I think they wouldn't. Not in their hearts they would not go along with it, but would they in large enough numbers really oppose it? I don't know. I'd like to think they would, but I don't know. Again, I think the polls would show they'd be very against it. I'm not sure the government cares what the polls show, but in any case, I don't see that Trump was headed towards bombing Gaza any more than it already is. So I don't see that as a legitimate excuse for backing that resolution, but who knows?
Yes, thank you, Dan. And Garrison, if you could unmute yourself, please.
Yeah, Dan, it seems to me like our best allies may be Rand Paul, Thomas Massie, and Marjorie Taylor Greene. Rand Paul just said that if Trump invades Venezuela or gives more money to Ukraine, his movement's going to dissolve. There's one thing that was a little unclear about that, whether he was saying that MAGA would collapse or simply that the support for Trump would collapse. Could you comment on that?
Yeah, well, I do think both are happening as we speak. I think MAGA is self-dissolving, and I think that the polls show Trump's support is evaporating, even short of an invasion of Venezuela. I mean, what's really going to affect Trump is that seems to be tanking the economy. So that's really what will destroy MAGA more than anything. But I do agree if he invaded Venezuela that he would lose much of his base of support. They don't want more war, So you did see Marjorie Taylor Greene, by the way, resign. She's not going to run again. So, but yeah, MAGA is falling apart, thank God. And it's because Trump is doing the opposite of what he promised those folks he was going to do.
Okay, Dan, thank you. As people know, our program is an hour and a half program, and we also have a program in San Francisco that's starting at 2. So we're going to have to end the Q&A right now. I apologize for anybody who had their hand up and didn't get called. Dan, would you like to make some final statement for us, and then we can adjourn?
And then, I'm sorry, could he include his contact information in the chat?
Yeah, hey, while I'm speaking, Roger, could you send my contact information around?
Dan, I'm not on my own computer.
Okay.
So
okay, I'll do it, but I'm going to have to hold this in my hand.
There's any number of people on their computers who can do that. So
I'll do it. I'll do it as I'm speaking. No, well, I just want to end really. I think Sharon said it best. That we just need to do what we have to do to oppose U.S. intervention abroad, whether it's in Colombia, whether it's in Venezuela. That's our duty. And And, you know, we can't affect what the UN's going to do. We can't affect what China's going to do. All we can do is what we can do. And I think what we can do is try to build a mass peace movement. That is our calling. I think that is what the moment calls for. So I don't have much more to say beyond that. I think, again,
That's
yeah.
well said, Dan. I think we all understand that the reason why Venezuela is being attacked, but Colombia is being attacked right now, is that they provide an alternative. And it's the alternative that we have to support. So it's precisely why the imperialists attack these nations, is precise reason why we need to support them. Please join us in the solidarity movement. And if you're in San Francisco, please join us at 2:00. Thank you very much, everybody, for attending. And we'll see you in 2 weeks.
Thank you.